यस्य प्रसादा भगवत प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादा नगति कुटोपि ध्यायां स्तुवं तस्य यशस्त्रि संध्यं वंदे गुरो श्री चरणारविंदम श्री चैतन्य मनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकथा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौरतिशे नमः। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। जय श्री गुरुदेव। Before we start today's session, starting from text 63 of chapter number 1 titled Spiritual Masters, I would like to say a few words about spiritual masters. In the current generation, it has been seen that the relationship between the disciple and the spiritual masters have been taken very lightly. The spiritual master is one because of whom the Supreme Lord can come within one's grasp. The relationship between the spiritual master and the disciple is more benign than the relationship between mother and child. When one is accepting a spiritual master, one has to bear in mind that one is surrendering one's all at the feet of the spiritual master. A person who is accepting a spiritual master is supposed to understand the spiritual master at various levels. Both the spiritual master and the disciple have to understand each other at the mental and spiritual levels. The disciple has to bear in mind that after accepting the spiritual master, one has no freedom. One is completely dependent on the mercy of the spiritual master as life proceeds. Nowadays, it is seen that this relationship between the spiritual master and the disciple is no more sacred. There are spiritual masters accepting millions of disciples. When asked why one is accepting so many disciples, the simple answer that these spiritual masters give is that they feel karuna or daya towards all the living entities and they want the Lord to be available to everybody. Such an answer is frivolous. We should note that a genuine spiritual master should not have more than a handful of devotees. It is important that the spiritual master understands each disciple specifically and is able to connect with him at all levels. The disciple also needs to understand that the spiritual master is his parent and he should be able to connect with his spiritual master at will. The spiritual master has to take all the disciples within his fold and establish a society where devotional service becomes a part of life. The initiating spiritual master is supposed to understand all the nuances of bhakti and he is supposed to transfer his entire consciousness on to the disciple. The disciple also has to practice bhajana and purify himself so that he can take over the consciousness of the spiritual master so that the Lord comes within his grasp. Having millions of disciples is not a solution to show mercy on different living entities. A spiritual master has to understand his position and his responsibility towards every living entity whom he takes within his fold. If the disciple is not able to maintain relationship with the spiritual master on a continuous basis, the progress of the disciple is bound to be very slow. The spiritual master has to understand his responsibility and maintain less number of disciples so that he can do justice towards all the disciples. The spiritual master has to understand that he is about to transfer all his energies and potencies into the heart of the disciple so that bhajana becomes very straightforward and the disciple is able to experience the Lord in full glow. Initiation is not a very cheap thing. The spiritual master has to first understand the capability and the capacity of the disciple and then accept disciples. The disciple also needs to understand his own shortcomings and understand and introspect himself before accepting a spiritual master. Nowadays, having a spiritual master has become a fad. This sort of tendency is not to be appreciated. One has to be very serious in one's spiritual life before entering into a relationship of disciple and spiritual master. Text 62.
Sadhuvo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam tva aham mad anyat tena jnananti naham tebhyo managapi.
Translation.
Saints are my heart and only I am their hearts. They do not know anyone but me, and therefore I do not recognize anyone besides them as mine.
In this verse, the author defines what a saint means. A saint is a person who has the Lord at the center of his life. A saint is one who has surrendered his all at the feet of the Lord and he only knows the Lord. The Lord assures in this verse that only the saints belong to him and nobody else. He only considers the saints to be his brethren, but he has no place for others who do not recognize the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is only at the feet of the saint that a seeker can get the blessings of being bestowed with the divine vision of the Lord. Hence, if one is serious about spiritual life, one should continuously visit saints and keep their company. Text 63.
Bhavat vidha bhagavatas tirtha bhuta swayam vibho tirtha kurvanti tirthani swantastena gadabhrata.
Translation.
Saints of your caliber are themselves places of pilgrimage. Because of their purity, they are constant companions of the Lord, and therefore they can purify even the places of pilgrimage.
This verse was spoken by Maharaj Yudhishthir to Sri Vidur. Though Vidur was the minister in Dhritarashtra's court in the land of Hastinapura, Vidura was in his heart a great saint. Vidura had surrendered his all at the feet of Lord Krishna. Yudhishthir recognized this fact and addressed him as saint. Yudhishthira got all his knowledge from Vidura by taking his directions. When a person interacts with a saintly person, all the sins of the person who is interacting with the saint is burnt. Associating with the saintly person is the shortcut to burning one's karmas. As one interacts with saints, it is seen that the way life proceeds is completely changed. The intentions of the persons who are not pure is even purified by the association of saints. Text 64.
Shri Bhakta Gana Haya Dvividha Prakara Parishad Gana Eka Sadhaka Gana Ara.
Translation.
Such pure devotees are two types: personal associates, Parshadas, and neophyte devotees, Sadhakas.
Here, the author says that the devotees can be divided into two types. One are the Parshadas and one are the Sadhakas. The Parshadas are eternally liberated souls. They have been in the association of the Lord eternally. They have never separated themselves from the Lord, and they appear as devotees during the Leelas of the Lord whenever the Lord advents onto the material planet. The second type of devotees are the sadhakas, or one who aspires to have the eternal association of the Lord and who take the association of liberated ones so that even they can come into the category of liberated souls. So thus these two types of devotees are described herewith. Text 65 and 66.
Ishvara avatara yetina prakara amsha avatara ara guna avatara Shaktya Avesha Avatara Tritiya E Mata Amsha Avatara Purusha Matsyadika Yata.
Translation.
There are three categories of incarnations of Godhead: partial incarnations, qualitative incarnations, and empowered incarnations. The Purushas and Matsyas are examples of partial incarnations.
In this
verse, the author describes three types of incarnations, namely partial, qualitative, and empowered incarnations. The partial incarnations are those incarnations who are the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself, but only exhibit a small quantum of the energy of the Lord. Hence, the Matsya Avatara and Kurma Avatara, etc., come under the category of partial incarnations. The qualitative incarnations are namely three in number. They are the Sattvic, the Rajasic, and Tamo incarnations of the Lord. These are the material qualitative incarnations of the Lord, which is used for the management of the universe. Brahma represents the Rajasic incarnation of the Lord, Lord Shiva represents the Tamasic incarnation of the Lord, and Sri Vishnu himself, the source of all incarnations, has taken the role of the Sattvic incarnation of the Lord. Hence, these three represent the qualitative incarnations of the Lord. Then there is this empowered incarnations. Empowered incarnation is the energy of the Lord. When an individual shows exemplary qualities, it is possible that the Lord empowers such a living entity with all his powers. The example of empowered incarnation is typically Lord Parshurama. Lord Parshurama was a human being with extraordinary qualities. The Lord empowered him with his specific qualities so that he could erase the Kshatriyas from the face of the earth 21 times and cleanse the earth of evil rule. Text 67. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, तीन गुण अवतारे गणी शक्त्या आवेश सनकादि पृथु व्यास मुनि. As mentioned earlier, the three guna avatars of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva are mentioned here, and the empowered incarnations are people like Sanaka, Sanat and Sanandan Kumaras, and also Prithu Maharaj, who happens to be the empowered incarnation of the Lord. Text 68. Duirupe haye bhagavaneena prakasha ekata prakasha haya are ta vilasa. Translation. The personality of Godhead exhibits himself into two kinds of forms, Prakasha and Vilasa. In this verse, the author explains the two types of expansions of Lord Krishna. They are the Prakasha and Vilasa Vigrahas. The Prakasha Vigrahas are self-effulgent. The Prakasha expansions of the Lord is represented by the 16,108 expansions of the Lord who have stayed with each of the Queen of Dwaraka. That is, the Lord himself expands in his own original form and stays with each of the queens of Dwaraka. Similarly, in the Rasa dance, Lord Krishna expands himself into millions of gopi so that each gopi has got a Krishna with herself, so that the Rasa dansa is performed. Such an expansion of the Lord is called Prakasha expansion. In the Prakasha expansion, all the features of Krishna are exactly identical with the original Krishna. Hence, there is no difference between the Prakasha forms and the original source of Lord Krishna. However, in the Vilasa expansion, the Lord expands into different entities. And there are some bodily differences between the Vilasa expansion and Lord Sri Krishna. Lord Balarama is the first Vilasa expansion of the Lord. There is a difference in the color and features of Lord Balarama and Krishna, although they are non-different. Similarly, the Narayana of Vaikuntha is four-handed, and hence he is also different in appearance as compared to the original source, that is Sri Krishna. Thus, there are infinite Prakasha and Vilasa expansions of the Lord. Text 69 and 70. एक ई विग्रह यदि हया बहुरूप आकारेता भेद नहीं एक ही स्वरूप महिषी विवाहे यायचे काल रस इहा के काहिए कृष्णेर मुख्य प्रकाश. Translation. When the personality of Godhead expands himself in many forms, all not different in their features, as Lord Krishna did when he married 16,000 queens and when he performed his rasa dance, such forms of the Lord are called manifested form, Prakasa Vigrahas. Thus, this is a continuation from the previous verse wherein it is explained that the Lord manifests himself in various similar forms when he does his leelas with the Queen of Dwaraka. Text 71. Chitram Bataitat Ekana Vapusha Yugapad Prathak Grehusha Dvi Asta Sahasram Striya Eka Udavahat. Translation. It is astounding that Lord Sri Krishna, who is one without a second, expanded himself in 16,000 similar forms to marry 16,000 queens in their respective homes. Text 72. Rasotsavaha Sampravrito Gopi Mandala Manditaha Yogeshwarane Krishnena Tasham Madhye Dvayor Dvayaha. When Lord Sri Krishna, surrounded by groups of cowherd girls, began the festivities of the rasa dance, the Lord of all mystic powers placed himself between each two girls. The preceding two verses are a description of Lord Krishna's Prakasha forms, of how he expanded himself to satisfy the queens of Dwaraka and the gopis of Vrindavana. Text 73-74. Pravishtena Grihitanam Kantesva Nikatam Striya Yam Manyaran Navastavad Vimana Sata Sankulam Divavyukasam Sa Dharanam Ati Autsukya Brutatmanam Tato Dundu Bhayo Nedur Nipetu Pushpa Vristaya. Translation. When the cowherd girls of Krishna thus joined together, each girl thought that Krishna was dearly embracing her alone. To behold this wonderful pastime of the lords, the denizens of heaven and their wives, all very eager to see the dance, flew in the sky in their hundreds of airplanes. They showered flowers and beat sweetly on drums. Witnessing the rasa dance of Krishna is an unparalleled event. The rasa dance happens in the spiritual worlds eternally. However, the denizens of heaven are material in nature. They never get a chance to view the rasa dance in the spiritual world. It's only a human being who has taken birth on this earth can, through sadhana and the Guru's mercy, enter into the spiritual planet. But the denizens of heaven crave for having a human body so that they can serve the Lord. Text 75. Anekatra prakatata rupasya kashya ye kada sarvata tat swarupaiva sa prakasha itirayate. Translation. If numerous forms, all equal in their features, are displayed simultaneously, such forms are called Prakasha Vigraha of the Lord. Thus, it is described here that when Sri Krishna multiplies himself, they are called the Prakasha Vigrahas. Text 76. Ekahi vigraha kintu akare haya ana aneka prakasha haya vilasa tara nama. Translation. But when the numerous forms are slightly different from one another, they are called Vilasa Vigrahas. Text 77. Swarupam anyakaram yat tasya bhati vilasataha prayenatma samam shaktya savilaso nigadyate. Translation. When the Lord displays numerous forms with different features by his inconceivable potency, such forms are called Vilasa Vigrahas. Text 78. Yaiche Baladeva Parabhyome Narayana Yaiche Vasudeva Pradyum Nadi Sankarshana. Translation. Examples of such Vilasa Vigrahas are Baladeva, Narayana in Vaikuntha Dhama and the Chaturviha, namely Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna and Anirudh. It is given here
that Krishna, to manage the Vaikuntha planets, has expanded himself, primarily by first expanding as Lord Baladeva. Baladeva expands in the form of Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna and Aniruddha. The expansion of Baladeva that exists in the Vaikuntha is Lord Narayana himself, who has taken the four-handed form. Thus, all these represent the Vilasa Vigraha of Lord Sri Krishna. Text 79 and 80.
ईश्वरेर शक्ति हया ई तीन प्रकार एक लक्ष्मी गण पूर महिषी गण आर व्रजगोपी गण आर सभाते प्रधान ब्रजेंद्र नंदन याते स्वयं भगवान.
Translation.
The energies consorts of the Supreme Lord are of three kinds: the Lakshmis in Vaikuntha, the queens of Dwaraka, and the gopis in Vrindavan. The gopis are the best of all, for they have the privilege of serving Sri Krishna, the primeval Lord, the son of King of Braja.
The energies of the Lord are the consorts of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. There are three gradations in the consorts of the Supreme Lord. The highest consorts of the Supreme Lord exist in Sri Vrindavana. The gopis are all the eternal consorts of the Lord in the mood of conjugal love in Vrindavana. The second type of consorts of the Supreme Lord exists in Dwaraka. They are fundamentally headed by Sri Rukmani Devi, Satyabhama, Jambavati and others. The consorts such as Rukmani Devi, Satyabhama and Jambavati are in holy wedlock with the Lord, and hence they enjoy the swakiya rasa. The gopis of Vrindavan are unwedded wives of the Lord and they enjoy the parakiya rasa. Thus, there are two fundamental rasas, the parakiya rasa and the swakiya rasa. The parakiya rasa exists in Vrindavan, whereas the swakiya rasa exists in Dwaraka. In terms of mood, the mood of Vrindavana is higher than the mood of Dwaraka. The third concept of the Lord exists in Vaikuntha in the form of Lakshmi Devi. Lakshmi Devi is in the mood of Aishwarya or the mood of brilliance. Lakshmi Devi hence represents the third gradation of consorthood with the Supreme Lord. Text 81.
स्वयं रूप कृष्णेर काय व्यूह तांर सम भक्त सहिते हया तार आवरण.
Translation.
The personal associates of the primeval Lord Sri Krishna are his devotees who are identical with him. He is complete with his entourage of devotees.
The Supreme Lord expands himself as his own paraphernalia. Baladeva is responsible for expanding in various ways in which he could serve the Supreme Lord. In order to enjoy various pastimes, the Lord engages Lord Baladeva in such a way that they expand in the form of their partial expansions and devotees. Thus, the Lord enjoys relationship with his paraphernalia and the devotees so that they form leelas. Text 82.
भक्त आदि क्रमे कैला सभार वंदन यही सभार वंदन सर्व सुभेरे कारण.
Translation.
Now I have worshipped all the various levels of devotees. Worshipping them is the source of all good fortune.
Thus, before the start of the Leelas of Lord Gauranga Mahaprabhu, the author Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami pays obeisances to all these forms of the Lord and his devotees. Text 83.
प्रथम श्लोके कहे सामान्य मंगलाचरण द्वितीय श्लोके त करी विशेष वंदन.
Translation. In the first verse, I have invoked a general benediction, but in the second I have prayed to the Lord in a particular form. Text 84.
वंदे श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य नित्यानंदो सहोदितो गौड़ोदय पुष्पवंतो चित्रो सन दो तमोनुदो.
Translation.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto Sri Krishna Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are like the sun and moon. They have arisen simultaneously on the horizon of Gauda to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all.
text 85 and 86.
व्रजे ये विहार पूर्वे कृष्ण बलराम कोटि सूर्य चंद्र जिनी दोहार निज धाम सेयिदु ये जगते रे हा इया सदाया गौड़ देशे पूर्व शैले करिला उदय.
Translation.
Sri Krishna and Balarama, the personalities of Godhead who formerly appeared in Vrindavan and were millions of times more effulgent than the sun and the moon, have arisen over the eastern horizon of Gaudadesha or West Bengal, being compassionate for the fallen state of the world.
From this verse onwards, the author starts describing the glories of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Hari Bol.